Here to discuss the papers with us, former BBC Wales journalist Stuart Hughes, now a senior producer in the BBC's World Affairs unit. Good morning, Stuart.
Morning, Vaughan.
I suppose we have to start with the virus. There's very little else in the papers today.
There is, and I'm sorry to have to bring listeners back down to earth after Yolo's very hopeful message, but the newspapers do make for grim and perhaps even rather chilling reading with so much attention on the coronavirus. And this morning, as I scanned the papers with my morning coffee, looking at the papers rather than the newts in upon them, I had to take a moment just to remind ourselves just how fast our daily lives are changing. It's only just over a week since the pubs and restaurants closed, less than a week since Boris Johnson gave that address to the nation, and yet we're waking up this morning to headlines like the one in the Sunday Telegraph that the crisis will get worse before it gets better, referring to the letter that Boris Johnson is sending to every household, and the headline in the Sunday People that 20,000 deaths will be a good result, picking up on comments by Stephen Powis, the medical director of NHS England. And it feels like the Sunday papers, like all of us, are still trying to get their heads around the magnitude of this crisis. They try to strike a balance, really, on the one hand urging the public to keep calm and carry on, as the famous poster said, and follow the government's advice, but on the other hand hinting at fears of what could be just around the corner in a couple of weeks when the peak of the coronavirus outbreak's expected to hit, and particularly the possible effect on the NHS. So on the front page of The Observer, there's a report that the mortality rate for patients in intensive care who've been infected with COVID-19 is running close to 50%. That's according to an audit by the Intensive Care National Audit and Research Centre. And one doctor tells The Observer rather chillingly that a lot of patients in critical care are going to die anyway, and there's a fear that just ventilating them for the sake of it, that they're being ventilated for the sake of it, even though it won't be effective. And another story that catches the eye as far as the NHS is concerned is in the Sunday Telegraph, the front page of Sunday Telegraph, that reports that the NHS failed a government test of its ability to handle a pandemic. It refers to an exercise called Exercise Cygnus in October 2016, which looked at how the NHS would cope with a major flu outbreak with a similar mortality rate to what we're seeing with COVID-19, and it found that Britain would be overwhelmed by a severe outbreak amid a shortage of critical care beds, capacity in morgues, and a shortage of personal protective equipment, which is one of the things that obviously we've heard a lot of in the news in recent days. But
there's going to be a lot of questions asked when this is all over, isn't it? But you know, the papers are floating some pretty wild suggestions. What's this? The Mail on Sunday is talking about Michel Barnier.
A very strange story in the Mail on Sunday. Its headline points to China. It says Boris Johnson's allies turned on China over the coronavirus outbreak, and says that China's going to face a reckoning over its handling of the outbreak. But bizarrely, the Mail on Sunday says that it's been tracking the source of the outbreak, which has infected the Prime Minister and other members of the Cabinet, and suggesting that it could have originated with who else? This is the Mail on Sunday after all, but the EU's chief Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier. The story reads, could this be the ultimate revenge for Brexit? You know, when a story starts with the word could, it means it probably isn't. So it says that Boris Johnson could have been laid low by the Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier, according to one theory. Again, if you read through the Fleet Street Code, one theory is
something
code
we thought up in the pub. Yeah,
exactly. A somewhat far-fetched idea.
Not in the pub these days, but
no, in the virtual pub that someone's concocted, it probably has very little basis in fact.
What else have you seen, Stuart?
Another thing that caught my eye is, aside from the miserable news, is probably referring to what Yolo has said, that as we try to make sense of everything that's happening around us and the speed, that there is potentially a positive side if we want to look for it, as difficult it is at the moment. So a lot of the papers are offering suggestions on ways we can make use of the time we now have available to us productively. I think over the past week, many of us have been taking down that unread copy of War and Peace off the bookshelf, or tackling the junk in the spare room that's been building and building for years. I've been looking at the junk in the spare room and I haven't actually tackled it yet. But the positive side is reflected in many of the papers. So on the front page of the Telegraph there's a headline, Return of the Hobby. brilliant new crafts and ideas to do inside for those of us who want to rediscover our creative side with the time we've got available to us. The Mail on Sunday, if you need to exercise those brain cells, it has an 8-page lockdown puzzle special to keep the brain going with the crosswords and the Sudokus, and also tips on how to do a deep spring clean, soothe your stress and help fight the virus. But the Observer, picking up on what Yolo's been talking about, that the fact that spring is here, that it's a time for our mental and our physical well-being to perhaps focus on nature a little bit at this time of crisis, as Yolo was saying. Stephen Moss, writing in the Observer, says, appreciating the part nature plays in our lives is an essential part of what makes us human. If any good can emerge from the current situation, it may be a greater appreciation of what nature means to us and what we in turn can do for nature. So a lot of bad news in the newspapers today. It's pretty grim breakfast reading, but there are some glimmers of spring hope to be found as well.
And what does the rest of the day hold for you, Stuart? Are you working or cleaning or looking out the window or what?
Well, I'm probably like a lot of people. I got messages from colleagues in work yesterday saying, can you help me with this and that? And I did have to remind them it was Saturday in these strange times. It's very easy to lose track of time. So over the weeks ahead, and certainly as this crisis seems to be likely to continue for some time, I'm trying to remember it is the weekend. It's family time.
Stuart, thank you very much indeed. You can listen again to this programme on BBC Sounds, the app for music, radio and podcasts. If you want advance notice of guests, follow @Wales Politics on Twitter. And there's more Welsh Politics on BBC One today with Politics Wales at 10 a.m. After the news is All Things Considered. Bore da chi.